The moment Annika walked into Magnolia's fine dining with her 6-month-old son Mason, she knew she didn't belong there. The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors, and the soft murmur of wealthy patrons discussing business. Deals filled the air. But desperation had brought her here tonight, and she clutched the crumpled newspaper clipping in her free hand like a lifeline. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What happened next would change everything she thought she knew about kindness, judgment, and the unexpected places where miracles can unfold. Annika Rodriguez had been walking for 3 hours straight through downtown Chicago, her worn sneakers developing new holes with each step. Mason, bundled in a thin blanket she'd found at the thrift store, had been fussing on and off all afternoon. She'd spent her last $12 on baby formula that morning, leaving her with exactly 47 cents in her wallet and a growing knot of panic in her stomach. The newspaper clipping she'd found blowing across Michigan Avenue earlier that day announced a job fair happening at the Palmer House Hotel. Restaurant servers, kitchen staff, housekeeping, all positions she could do if someone would just give her a chance. The problem was, the job fair had ended an hour ago, and the hotel was 15 blocks away from where she stood now. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As she passed the gleaming windows of Magnolia's fine dining, she spotted a small sign tucked discreetly near the entrance. Now hiring, immediate interviews available. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't just any restaurant. This was the kind of place where meals cost more than she used to make in a week at her old job at the diner. The kind of place where people like her weren't supposed to set foot inside. Mason began to whimper, his tiny fists rubbing at his eyes. She bounced him gently, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Just a few more minutes, baby. Mama's going to fix this. The hostess who greeted her at the door was a tall woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that faltered slightly when she took in Annika's appearance. Her jeans had a patch on the knee. Her sweater had seen better days, and she probably smelled like the subway platform where she'd spent last night when the shelter was full. "I'm sorry, but we're fully booked this evening," the hostess said, her voice professionally polite but distant. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the diner down the street." Actually," Annika said, summoning every ounce of courage she had left, "I saw your hiring sign. I'm here about a job." The hostess's expression shifted to one of barely concealed skepticism. She glanced around the dining room, where men in expensive suits and women dripping with jewelry sat at tables set with more silverware than Annika had ever seen in one place. "I'm afraid our manager isn't available for interviews this evening. You'll need to come back during business hours tomorrow with a resume and references. Tomorrow." Annika's shoulders sagged slightly. She didn't have anywhere to spend the night, and Mason needed to eat again in a few hours. But before she could respond, Mason's whimpering escalated into a full-blown cry that echoed through the restaurant's vaulted ceilings. Every head in the dining room turned their way. "I'm so sorry," Annika whispered, jiggling Mason frantically. "He's just hungry and tired. Please, I just need 5 minutes to speak with someone about—" "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside," the hostess said, her voice sharp. "Now, you're disturbing our guests." But Mason's cries only grew louder, his little face turning red as he worked himself into a proper tantrum. Annika felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as she noticed the other diners staring, some with annoyance, others with what looked like pity. She turned to leave, but her foot caught on the edge of an ornate rug, and she stumbled, nearly dropping her baby. A strong hand caught her elbow, steadying her. "Easy there," said a deep voice. She looked up to find herself staring into the kindest brown eyes she'd ever seen. The man was probably in his mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and laugh lines around his eyes. He wore a simple navy sweater and jeans, not the typical attire of Magnolia's usual clientele, but somehow he seemed to belong here in a way she never could. "Thank you," she managed, still struggling to calm Mason. "That's quite a set of lungs." "He's got there," the man said with a gentle smile. "How old?" 6 months, Annika replied, surprised by the genuine interest in his voice rather than irritation. The hostess appeared at their side, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Mr. Chen, I'm so sorry about this disruption. I was just asking them to—" "It's fine, Rebecca," the man said calmly. "Babies cry, it's what they do." He looked back at Annika. "You know, I couldn't help but overhear that you're looking for work. What kind of experience do you have?" Annika blinked in surprise. Most people were trying to get away from her crying baby, not strike up a conversation. "I worked at Miller's Diner for 3 years before it closed down last month. I can wait tables, work the register, help in the kitchen, whatever needs doing. And you came here looking for a job?" There was no judgment in his voice, just curiosity. "I know it's not the kind of place that usually hires people like me," she said honestly, "but I saw the sign, and I'm good at what I do. I show up on time, I work hard, and I treat customers right." Mason's crying had subsided to intermittent sniffles, and she realized she was swaying back and forth without thinking about it, a motion that had become as natural as breathing over the past 6 months. "People like you?" the man asked, raising an eyebrow. Annika gestured to herself and Mason. "Young, broke, single mother with no babysitter and holes in her shoes. I get it. I don't exactly fit the image of this place." Something flickered across the man's face, an expression she couldn't quite read. "You know what I think?" he said. "I think image is overrated. Some of the best people I've ever worked with looked nothing like what anyone expected." The hostess cleared her throat. "Mr. Chen, your table is ready whenever you'd like to be seated." He nodded, but didn't move away from Annika. "Tell you what," he said, "why don't you and Mason join me for dinner? We can talk about your experience, and maybe I can put in a good word with the manager." Annika's mouth fell open slightly. I couldn't. I don't have money for a place like this." "My treat," he said simply. "Besides, it sounds like Mason there could use a high chair and maybe some crackers to chew on." As if on cue, Mason let out a small burp and then smiled his first real smile of the day, reaching out with his tiny fingers toward the man's face. "I think that's a yes," the man laughed, allowing Mason to grab onto his finger. "I'm David, by the way, David Chen, Annika Rodriguez, and this is Mason." The hostess looked like she'd swallowed something unpleasant, but she managed to maintain her professional composure. "Right this way, Mr. Chen. I'll have them set up a high chair at your table." As they walked through the dining room, Annika caught the stares and whispered comments from other patrons. She held her head high anyway, focusing on Mason's happy babbling as he continued to grip David's finger. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, things were about to turn around. The table David Chen led them to was tucked into a corner near a large window overlooking the Chicago River. Evening lights danced on the water's surface, creating a view that would have cost her a month's rent at her old apartment. Mason settled into the high chair like he'd been eating at 5-star restaurants his whole life, immediately grabbing for the cloth napkin and trying to stuff it in his mouth. "So, Miller's Diner," David said, as he helped secure Mason's bib. "I actually ate there a few times. Great pie." Annika's eyes widened. "You knew Miller's? Most people from this part of town never ventured south of Roosevelt." "Food is food," David shrugged. "Besides, some of the best meals I've ever had came from places that didn't look like much from the outside. Mrs. Miller made a mean apple pie, if I remember correctly." "She did. She also gave me my first real job when I was 17 and had nothing but a GED and attitude." Annika's voice softened with memory. Taught me that how you treat people matters more than where they come from. A waiter appeared at their table, a young man who couldn't have been much older than Annika herself. His name tag read Trevor, and unlike the hostess, his smile seemed genuine when he looked at Mason. "Good evening, Mr. Chen, and hello there, little guy," Trevor said, making a funny face that got Mason giggling. "What can I get started for you tonight?" David gestured to Annika. "Ladies first." She opened the menu and immediately felt her stomach drop. The cheapest entree was $38. A simple salad cost more than she used to spend on groceries for an entire day. Her fingers tightened around the leather-bound menu as she tried to find something, anything that wouldn't make her feel like she was taking advantage of David's kindness. "The soup," she said finally. "Just the soup, please." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "Which soup would you like?" Trevor asked. "We have butternut squash bisque, lobster, thermidor, or wild mushroom with truffle oil." She had no idea what half of those words meant. The first one." David was studying her carefully. "You know what, Trevor? Bring us the chef's tasting menu for two, and maybe some of those soft dinner rolls for Mason to gnaw on." "Mr. Chen, I really can't," Annika started to protest. "When was the last time you ate a real meal?" David asked quietly. The question caught her off guard. She'd been surviving on peanut butter sandwiches and whatever free samples she could find at the grocery store. "I eat," she said defensively. "That's not what I asked." Mason chose that moment to bang his tiny fist on the high chair tray, sending his spoon clattering to the floor. Before Annika could move to pick it up, Trevor had already retrieved it and was offering Mason a new one. "Kids are the best customers," Trevor said with a grin. "They're honest about what they want, and they don't pretend to be something they're not." After Trevor left to place their order, David leaned back in his chair. "So tell me about yourself, Annika. What brought you to Chicago?" She'd learned to be careful with personal details. Too much information made people uncomfortable. Too little made them suspicious. But something about David's expression encouraged honesty. "I grew up in a small town outside Springfield. Got pregnant at 19, and my boyfriend decided fatherhood wasn't for him. My parents, let's just say they had strong opinions about unwed mothers." She adjusted Mason's bib, avoiding David's eyes. "I came to Chicago because it was big enough for someone like me to disappear if I needed to, but also big enough to offer opportunities. And how's that working out for you?" A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Well, I spent last night on a subway platform because the shelter was full, so I'd say not great." David was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Well, what about family? Friends?" "Mason is my family now. As for friend," she shrugged. "Hard to make friends when you're working 3 jobs just to afford a studio apartment. Even harder when you lose all 3 jobs in the same month because the diner closed, the grocery store cut staff, and the cleaning company decided they didn't want employees who had to bring their babies to work. You brought Mason to work with you. Childcare costs more than I was making. Mrs. Miller didn't mind. She said babies brought good luck. The grocery store manager let me keep him in a carrier while I stocked shelves during the early morning shift. But the cleaning company—" She shook her head. "They said it was unprofessional." Trevor returned with a basket of warm bread and a small bowl of what looked like baby-friendly crackers for Mason. The baby immediately grabbed one and began gumming it happily, getting crumbs all over his bib. "He's a good baby," David observed. "Seems pretty adaptable." "He has to be. We've moved 4 times in the past 6 months. He's learned to sleep anywhere, eat anything that's safe for him, and make friends with strangers." Annika watched Mason with a mixture of pride and sadness. "Sometimes I wonder if he'd be better off with a family that could give him a real home, you know? A yard, his own room, stability." "Do you love him?" The question was so simple, so direct, that it took her breath away. "More than anything in the world." Then he's already getting the most important thing any child can have. Their first course arrived, something David called amuse-bouche, which turned out to be tiny spoons with dollops of salmon and cream. Annika had never eaten anything so delicate or flavorful in her life. She tried to eat slowly, to savor it, but her body's hunger betrayed her caution. "You don't have to be polite," David said gently. "Eat as much as you want." "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said between bites. "You don't know me. For all you know, I could be lying about everything." "Are you?" "No. But you don't know that." David smiled. "You're right, I don't. But you know what I do know. I know you could have left your baby outside while you went in to ask about the job, but you didn't. I know you apologized to complete strangers when he cried, even though crying is what babies do. I know you've been bouncing him in that exact rhythm for so long that you don't even realize you're doing it anymore." He gestured to her unconscious swaying motion. "And I know that when you looked at that menu, the first thing you worried about wasn't whether you'd like the food, but whether you could afford not to take advantage of my offer." Annika stopped swaying, suddenly self-conscious. "How do you know all that?" "Because I pay attention, and because—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because I've been where you are. Maybe not exactly, but close enough." She studied his face, trying to reconcile this statement with his easy confidence in this expensive restaurant, his casual way of ordering the chef's tasting menu like it was nothing. "You've been homeless. Homeless, jobless, down to my last few dollars, with no idea where the next meal was coming from." David's voice carried the weight of genuine memory. "The difference was I didn't have a baby depending on me. I can't imagine how much harder that would have made everything." Mason dropped his cracker and started to fuss. Without thinking, Annika reached into her worn purse and pulled out a small stuffed elephant, the only toy she'd managed to keep through all their moves. It was missing one eye, and the stuffing was coming out of one ear. But Mason's face lit up when he saw it. "Mr. Elephant," she said in the silly voice she reserved just for him. He was getting lonely in Mama's purse. David watched this interaction with an expression she couldn't decipher. "How old were you when you had him?" 19. "I know what people think, that I was careless, irresponsible. Maybe I was. But I've never regretted it. Not for 1 second." "Why?" "Not—" She looked down at Mason, who was now contently chewing on Mr. Elephant's trunk. "Because he saved me. Before Mason, I was just existing, going through the motions, working dead-end jobs, dating guys who didn't care about me, living in a town where everyone already knew exactly who I was and who I'd always be. When I found out I was pregnant, it was like someone had handed me a purpose." "And his father? You said he left?" "Tyler." The name still left a bitter taste in her mouth. "He said he wasn't ready to be a father, that we were too young, that it would ruin our lives. He wanted me to make a different choice. When I wouldn't, he said I was on my own. I'm sorry. Don't be. Mason and I are better off without someone who could walk away that easily." Their next course arrived, something called pan-seared scallops with cauliflower puree. Annika had never tasted anything so perfectly prepared in her life. Each bite seemed to melt on her tongue, flavors she didn't even have names for dancing across her palate. "This is incredible," she said, then immediately felt embarrassed by her obvious amazement. "Food should be an experience," David said. "Not just fuel. Must be nice to think of it that way," she replied, then caught herself. "I'm sorry, that sounded bitter." It was honest. "And you're right. It is a privilege to think of food as anything other than survival." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, Mason babbling happily in his high chair and occasionally flinging pieces of his cracker at nearby diners. Each time it happened, Annika started to apologize, but David would catch her eye and shake his head slightly, as if to say it was perfectly fine. "Can I ask you something?" David said as they finished the scallops. "Sure. What's your dream? If money and circumstances weren't an issue, what would you want to do with your life? No one had asked her that question in years. She'd been so focused on simple survival that dreams had become a luxury she couldn't afford. I used to want to go to culinary school. I love cooking, creating something from nothing, making people happy with food. She laughed softly, ironic, considering I can barely feed myself right now. Not ironic. Fitting. The best chefs understand hunger, real hunger, not just appetite. Before she could ask what he meant by that, Mason let out an enormous burp that echoed through the dining room, followed by his most charming smile. Several nearby tables actually laughed, and for the first time all evening, Annika felt like maybe she and her son belonged here after all. The third course arrived just as Mason decided he'd had enough of sitting still. He began squirming in the high chair, making frustrated little grunts that Annika recognized as the precursor to another crying fit. She quickly unbuckled him and lifted him onto her lap, where he immediately reached for her water glass. "No, baby," she said softly, moving the glass out of reach. "That's not for you." David signaled Trevor, who appeared almost instantly. "Could we get a sippy cup with some water for the little man?" "Of course, Mr. Chen. We keep them on hand for our younger guests." Annika looked surprised. "You have sippy cups here." "Children are people too," David said simply. "They deserve to feel welcome in nice places, just like everyone else." As they waited for Mason's cup, Annika noticed something she'd missed before. David wore no wedding ring, but there was a faint tan line where one had been. His wallet, visible when he'd pulled out his phone earlier, had a small photo tucked behind his credit cards, too distant for her to make out clearly, but definitely a picture of people, not just a business card or receipt. "Do you have children?" she asked. David's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "I did have. It's complicated." Before Annika could ask what he meant, Trevor returned with a blue sippy cup filled with water. Mason grabbed it with both hands and immediately started drinking, some of the water dribbling down his chin and onto his bib. "Better?" David asked Mason, who responded by banging the cup on the table and grinning. "He likes you," Annika observed. "He's usually shy around strangers." Kids have good instincts about people. The third course was something called duck confit, with cherry gastrique. Annika had never eaten duck before, and she was amazed by how tender and flavorful it was. She found herself eating more slowly now, partly because she was getting full, but mostly because she wanted to make this experience last as long as possible. "So what's your plan?" David asked. "After tonight, I mean." Annika's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She'd been trying not to think about it after tonight. "I guess I'll try to find somewhere safe for Mason and me to sleep. Tomorrow I'll look for more job leads, maybe check with some of the diners on the south side. They might be more willing to hire someone like me." "What if you didn't have to do that?" "What do you mean?" David leaned forward slightly. "What if I told you I might be able to help with the job situation?" Annika felt her guard go up. She'd learned to be suspicious of offers that sounded too good to be true. "What kind of help?" "The kind where you get to use your skills and earn a decent wage, while still being able to take care of Mason." "And what would you want in return?" The question hung in the air between them. David's expression remained steady, but she caught something flickering in his eyes. Hurt, maybe, that she'd assumed his offer came with strings attached. "Nothing," he said quietly. "Just the satisfaction of helping someone who deserves a break." Why me? Why us? David was quiet for a long moment, watching Mason play with his sippy cup. "Can I tell you a story?" Annika nodded. 25 years ago, I was working 3 jobs to put myself through business school. One night I was so exhausted I fell asleep on the train and missed my stop. Ended up in a part of town I'd never seen before, completely lost, with no money for cab fare because I'd spent my last few dollars on textbooks. He paused to take a sip of wine. I wandered around for hours, trying to find my way back to somewhere familiar. Finally, I stumbled into this little diner, place called Eddie's, run by an old Greek man who barely spoke English. I explained my situation, asked if I could use their phone to call a friend for a ride. Did he let you? Better than that. He sat me down, made me a sandwich, and wouldn't let me leave until I'd eaten. Then he called his son to drive me home. Wouldn't take no for an answer, wouldn't accept any payment. I promised I'd come back and pay him for the meal, but by the time I could afford to return, the place had closed down. Annika could see where this was going. You never got to thank him. Never even got his last name. But that sandwich probably saved my life that night. I was so run down, so stressed, I might have collapsed if I'd kept walking around lost and hungry. David met her eyes. Sometimes helping someone isn't about them paying you back. Sometimes it's about paying forward the kindness someone else showed you. Mason had finished with his sippy cup and was now trying to grab the small flower arrangement. In the center of the table, Annika gently redirected his attention to Mr. Elephant, but not before he managed to pull one petal off a rose. "Oh, no," she said, reaching for the damaged flower. "I'm so sorry." "It's fine," David laughed. "He's exploring the world. That's what babies do." A well-dressed woman at the next table leaned over toward them. She was probably in her 60s, with perfectly styled silver hair and jewelry that probably cost more than Annika had ever made. "In a year." "Excuse me," the woman said, her tone polite but pointed. "I don't mean to be rude, but your baby is being quite disruptive. Some of us are trying to enjoy a quiet dinner." Annika felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, we'll try to keep him quieter." "Actually," David said, his voice calm but firm, "babies make noise. It's part of their development. If you're looking for absolute silence, perhaps you'd be more comfortable with takeout." The woman's eyes widened in shock. Clearly she wasn't used to being spoken to that way. "Well, I never—" "Then perhaps tonight's a good night to start," David replied pleasantly, turning his attention back to Annika and Mason as if the woman had never spoken. The woman huffed and turned back to her own table, muttering something to her dining companion about standards and what this world is coming to. "You didn't have to do that," Annika said softly. "Yes, I did. People like that think their comfort matters more than basic human decency. Mason has every right to exist in this space. Not everyone sees it that way, not everyone has to, but in places where I have influence, they do." There was something in the way he said, "places where I have influence," that made Annika study his face more carefully. He spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who was used to being listened to, used to having his opinions carry weight. "What exactly do you do for work?" she asked. David smiled. "I solve problems, connect people with opportunities, try to make sure good things happen to people who deserve them." It was a non-answer, but before Annika could press for details, their final course arrived, a dessert that looked more like art than food. Delicate chocolate structures rose from the plate like tiny skyscrapers, accompanied by what Trevor explained was vanilla bean ice cream with gold leaf. "Gold leaf?" Annika repeated. "As in actual gold?" "Edible gold," David confirmed. "Completely tasteless, but it looks impressive." Mason had started to get fussy again, rubbing his eyes and making the little whimpering sounds that meant he was getting tired. Annika bounced him gently on her lap, but she could tell he was reaching his limit for new experiences and stimulation. "He's getting sleepy," she said apologetically. "How about we wrap this up then? I'll ask Trevor to box up the dessert. You can enjoy it later. You really don't have to—" "Annika," David interrupted gently, "let me help, please." There was something in his tone that stopped her protests. Not pity, not condescension, but something deeper. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. As Trevor packed up their dessert and David handled the check, which he kept carefully angled away from Annika's view, she found herself studying this man who had turned what should have been one of the worst nights of her life into something almost magical. "Thank you," she said as they prepared to leave, "for everything. I know you didn't have to. I had a choice," David said, standing and helping her gather Mason's things. "Just like you had a choice to walk into this restaurant looking for work instead of just asking for handouts. We both made the choice to try." As they walked toward the exit, Annika noticed the hostess watching them with undisguised curiosity. Several other diners also turned to stare, and she caught fragments of whispered conversations. "Who is she? Never seen him with..." The baby was actually quite sweet. David seemed oblivious to the attention, chatting easily with Mason, who had perked up now that they were moving again. At the door, he turned to Annika with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I want you to meet me tomorrow," he said. "There's something I need to show you, something that might change everything." "What kind of something?" "The kind that turns problems into opportunities." He pulled a business card from his wallet and handed it to her. "Meet me at this address at 10 a.m. Bring Mason." Annika looked down at the card. The address was in the financial district, but there was no company name, no job title, just David's name and contact information. "David, I don't understand." "Trust me," he said simply. "Just this once. Trust a stranger who remembers what it's like to be hungry and lost and desperate for someone to believe in you." As they stepped out into the Chicago night, Annika felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope, not the desperate, grasping kind that usually left her disappointed, but something steadier, something that felt like it might actually be real. Annika spent the night in the 24-hour laundromat on Ashland Avenue, dozing fitfully in a plastic chair while Mason slept in his stroller beside the warm dryers. She'd found the place after wandering. For an hour, David's business card clutched in her hand like a talisman. The elderly attendant, a Puerto Rican woman named Carmen, had taken one look at them and pretended not to notice when Annika didn't actually put any clothes in the machines. By morning, her back ached from the uncomfortable chair, but Mason had slept through the night without waking once, a small miracle that she attributed to his full belly and the restaurant's warm atmosphere still working their magic. She used the laundromat's bathroom to clean them both up as best she could, changing Mason into his only clean outfit and splashing water on her face to wash away the exhaustion. The address on David's card led her to a gleaming 40-story office, building in the heart of Chicago's financial district. Standing on the sidewalk, craning her neck to see the top, she felt the same overwhelming sense of not belonging that had hit her at Magnolia's. Men and women in expensive suits streamed past her, talking rapidly into Bluetooth earpieces about mergers and acquisitions and market positions she didn't understand. The lobby was all marble and mirrors, with a security desk manned by 2 guards in crisp uniforms. Annika approached hesitantly, Mason heavy in her arms and her diaper bag slung over her shoulder. "I'm here to see David Chen," she told the younger of the 2 guards, a man with kind eyes who smiled at Mason. "Your name?" "Annika Rodriguez," he asked. "Me to meet him at 10. The guard consulted his computer screen, typed something, then looked up with surprise. "Top floor, ma'am. Express elevator bank C. Here's your visitor badge." "Top floor." Annika's stomach dropped as she clipped the badge to her sweater. In her experience, the top floor was where the people who made all the decisions lived, people so far removed from the world she inhabited that they might as well be from another planet. The elevator ride seemed to take forever, Mason babbling happily as he watched the floor numbers climb 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. When the doors finally opened, she stepped into a reception area that was somehow even more intimidating than the restaurant had been. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. A receptionist with perfect makeup and an even more perfect smile looked up from her desk. Ms. Rodriguez? Mr. Chen is waiting for you in his office, right through those doors, his office. Not a conference room, not some impersonal meeting space, but his actual office. Anika's hands began to shake slightly as she pushed through the heavy wooden doors. The space beyond was enormous, easily larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in. More floor-to-ceiling windows dominated one wall, while the others were lined with bookshelves, awards, and photographs. David stood with his back to her, looking out at the city skyline, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than she used to make in 3 months. "You came," he said without turning around. "You asked me to." He turned. Then, and she was relieved to see that his smile was the same one she remembered from the restaurant. Warm, genuine, completely at odds with the power and wealth displayed in this office. "How did you sleep?" The question caught her off guard. Most people asked how she was doing in general terms, not about specifics like sleep. "Better than usual, actually. Mason slept through the night." "Good. That's good." He gestured to a seating area near the windows, a leather sofa and matching chairs arranged around a coffee table. "Please, sit. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? Something for Mason?" She settled onto the sofa, Mason immediately trying to climb over the back. "To get a better view of the windows. I'm okay, but David, I have to ask, what is this? Who are you, really?" Instead of answering directly, he walked to his desk and picked up a framed photograph, bringing it over to show her. The picture showed a much younger David standing next to an Asian woman with a radiant smile, both of them wearing graduation caps and gowns. Between them was a little boy, maybe 4 years old, with David's eyes and his mother's delicate features. "My wife, Lily, and my son, Marcus," David said softly. This was taken at Lily's medical school graduation. She'd just been accepted to a pediatric residency at Children's Hospital. Annika studied the photograph, noting the past tense he'd used. "What happened to them?" "Car accident, 3 years ago. Drunk driver ran a red light." His voice was steady, but she could see the pain in his eyes. "Marcus died instantly. Lily held on for 2 days before—" "Oh, David, I'm so sorry." He set the photograph on the coffee table between them. "Marcus would be 7 now, about Mason's age, actually, when this all happened." The pieces were starting to fall into place. His immediate comfort with Mason, his understanding of what it meant to be desperate and alone, his willingness to help a stranger. But she still didn't understand the office. The obvious wealth and power. "You still haven't told me who you are," she said gently. David smiled ruefully. "David Chen, CEO and founder of Chen Industries." The name hit her like a physical blow. Chen Industries. She'd seen their logo on billboards throughout the city, heard their commercials on the radio. They owned hotels, restaurants, real estate, developments. They were one of the largest employers in Chicago. "You're—" she started, then stopped, overwhelmed. "I'm someone who started with nothing and got lucky. Someone who built something big and successful and then lost the only things that really mattered." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Someone who's been looking for a way to make his life mean something again." Mason had discovered that the leather sofa made interesting squeaking sounds when he bounced on it. He was giggling delightedly, completely oblivious to the momentous conversation happening around him. "Is this some kind of charity case?" Annika asked, her pride flaring. "Because if you're looking for a tax write-off or a feel-good story for your company newsletter—" "No," David interrupted firmly. "This is about opportunity, mutual opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" He stood and walked to another wall, this one covered with photographs of various restaurants and hotels. "I own 43 restaurants in the Chicago area, from casual diners to 5-star establishments like Magnolia's. I also own 12 hotels, ranging from budget-friendly to luxury suites." Annika followed him with her eyes, trying to process this information. "Okay," Every single one of these businesses has the same problem. They can't find good people. People who understand what hospitality really means. People who know that serving others is an art form, not just a job. He turned back to her. People like you? David, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm not qualified to work at places like this. I barely finished high school. I've never been to culinary school or hospitality training, or Mrs. Miller trusted you to run her diner, he interrupted. The grocery store manager let you work alone during the early morning shift. The cleaning company hired you despite your lack of experience. What does that tell you? That I was desperate and they needed warm bodies? That you're reliable, trustworthy, someone people instinctively know they can count on? He came back to sit across from her. Those qualities can't be taught, Annika. They're either part of who you are or they're not. Mason had tired of the squeaky sofa and was now trying to pull himself up to look out the window. Annika moved to steady him, her mind racing. What exactly are you proposing? I want to offer you a position as assistant manager at one of my mid-level restaurants, a place called the Blue Door in Lincoln Park. It's successful but not intimidating, serves good food to working families and young professionals. A kind of place where Mason would be welcome in the back office when you need to bring him to work. Annika's breath caught in her throat. Assistant manager? David, I've never managed anything in my life. You've been managing to keep yourself and Mason alive and healthy under impossible circumstances. You've been making decisions, solving problems, prioritizing needs. That's what management is, just on a larger scale. What about childcare? I still can't afford. The position comes with benefits, including a childcare allowance. There's also a studio apartment above the Blue Door that comes with the job. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and safe and yours for as long as you want it. The offer was so far beyond anything she'd dared to hope for that she couldn't quite believe it was real. Why? Why would you do this for someone you barely know? David looked at the photograph on the coffee table. Because 3 years ago, a stranger helped me when I was lost and hungry and had nowhere else to turn, because I never got the chance to thank him. Because maybe this is how the universe works. We help each other when we can, and somehow it all balances out in the end. Mason had managed to pull himself to standing against the window, leaving tiny handprints on the glass as he stared out at the city below. From this height, Chicago spread out like a map, full of possibilities and promise. Annika watched her son's wonder and felt something shift inside her chest. Hope, real hope, for the first time in months. When would I start? She heard herself ask. Tomorrow, if you want. Today, if you're ready. She thought about the laundromat where they'd spent the night, about all the nights ahead that she'd been dreading, all the rejection letters and closed doors and disapproving looks. Then she looked at Mason, still mesmerized by the view, and made her decision. I'm ready, she said. We're ready. Poor girl's baby started crying at restaurant. Part 5. 3 hours later, Annika found herself standing in front of the Blue Door, a charming brick building nestled between a bookstore and a flower shop in Lincoln Park. The restaurant's facade was painted a welcoming navy blue with large windows that revealed warm lighting and customers enjoying lunch at rustic wooden tables. It was exactly the kind of place she would have loved to eat at if she'd ever had the money. David had driven them there himself in a sleek black SUV that probably cost more than most people's houses. During the ride, he'd explained that the Blue Door specialized in elevated comfort food, mac and cheese made with artisanal cheeses, pot roast served with locally sourced vegetables, homemade pies that changed with the seasons. The kind of food that made people feel good about eating, he'd said. Ready to meet your new team? He asked as they stood on the sidewalk. Mason was sleeping peacefully in his stroller, worn out by the morning's excitement. I'm terrified, Annika admitted. What if they don't like me? What if I mess this up? Then you'll learn from it and do better tomorrow. That's what everyone does. David held the door open for her. Besides, I have good instincts about people, and so do you, apparently. You trusted a stranger in an expensive restaurant last night. The interior of the Blue Door was even more welcoming than the exterior. Exposed brick walls were decorated with local artwork, and the open kitchen allowed diners to watch their meals being prepared. The lunch crowd was a mix of families with children, business people grabbing quick meals, and college students studying over coffee and sandwiches. A woman in her 30s approached them, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. She had short brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of confident stride that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing at all times. "David, we weren't expecting you today," she said, then noticed Annika and Mason. "And you must be the new assistant manager I've been hearing about. Sofia Martinez, meet Anika Rodriguez," David said. "Sofia's been running this place for the past 2 years. She's the best general manager in my entire company." Sofia extended her hand to Anika with a genuine smile. "Welcome to the Blue Door. And who's this handsome little guy?" "This is Mason," Annika said, shaking Sofia's hand and immediately feeling some of her nervousness. There was something refreshing about Sofia's straightforward manner. "He's beautiful." "How old?" 6 months, perfect age, old enough to be interesting, young enough to nap when you need him to. Sofia crouched down to Mason's level in the stroller. "We're very baby-friendly here. Half our staff are parents, and we believe kids belong in restaurants just as much as adults do." As if summoned by the mention of staff, a young man emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of steaming bowls. He was probably around Annika's age, with the kind of easy smile that immediately put people at ease. "James, come meet Annika," Sofia called out. "She's going to be working with us." James set down his tray and jogged over, wiping his hands on his apron. "Nice to meet you. I'm James Patterson, head server and part-time comedian, though the jury's still out on whether I'm actually funny." "He's not," Sofia said with mock seriousness, "but he's reliable, which counts for more in this business." "Thanks for the ringing endorsement, boss," James laughed. Then to Annika, "Don't let her fool you. She's tougher than she looks, but she's also the best manager I've ever worked for. You're going to love it here." Over the next hour, Sofia gave Annika a comprehensive tour of the restaurant. They walked through the dining room, where Sofia introduced her to servers, bussers, and regular customers who greeted her like family. They spent time in the kitchen, where the chef, a bearish man named Rodriguez, who insisted everyone call him Chef R, showed her how they prepared their signature dishes. "We use local suppliers whenever possible," Chef R explained as he prepped vegetables for the dinner service. "The woman who grows our tomatoes has been farming the same land for 30 years. The guy who raises our pork treats his animals better than most people treat their pets. It costs more, but it tastes better, and it's the right thing to do." In the back office, Sofia showed Annika the scheduling system, the inventory management software, and the customer feedback forms that help them continuously improve their service. "The most important thing to remember," Sofia said, as they sat at a small desk overlooking the kitchen, "is that hospitality is about making people feel cared for. It's not about the fanciest ingredients or the most expensive wine list. It's about making sure that when someone walks through our door, they feel welcome." Mason had woken up during the tour and was now sitting on Annika's lap, fascinated by the organized chaos of the restaurant around him. Servers moved efficiently between tables. The kitchen maintained a steady rhythm of chopping and sizzling, and through it all, there was a sense of teamwork that Annika had never experienced in her previous jobs. "What happened to the last assistant manager?" Anika asked, suddenly worried that she was replacing someone who'd been fired. "Maria got promoted to general manager at our new location in Evanston," Sofia explained. "She'd been here for 3 years, working her way up from server to assistant." Manager. Now she's running her own place. Sophia smiled. That's how we do things here. We promote from within whenever possible. People who understand our culture, who care about our mission. And what exactly is your mission? Good food, fair wages, and treating everyone, staff and customers, like family. Sophia glanced toward the kitchen where Chef R was teaching. A young prep cook how to properly dice onions. David started this company because he believed restaurants could be different. They could pay living wages, offer real benefits, and create careers instead of just jobs. As they talked, Annika watched. David interact with the staff. He knew everyone's name, asked about their families, listened when they had suggestions or concerns. This wasn't the distant CEO she might have expected, but someone who genuinely cared about the people who worked for him. Mr. Chen seems different than I imagined, Annika said carefully. Sophia followed her gaze. He is different. Most owners show up once a quarter for a financial review and disappear. David's here at least once a week, sometimes more. He works alongside the staff when we're slammed, covers shifts when people call in sick. After his family, she paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. After his family died, this company became his way of honoring their memory. Lily used to volunteer at food banks, and Marcus loved coming to the restaurants. David channels that energy into making sure this place represents something meaningful. Mason had started to fuss, and Annika realized it was well past his usual nap time. I should probably get him settled somewhere. Come on, Sophia said, standing. Let me show you the apartment. They climbed a narrow staircase to the second floor, where Sophia unlocked a door marked 2A. The apartment beyond was small but spotless, with hardwood floors, a kitchenette, and large windows that filled the space with natural light. Someone had already been here. There was a crib set up in the bedroom, along with a changing table and a rocking chair. David had his assistant pick up some basics, Sophia explained, when she saw Annika's surprised expression. Baby furniture, some groceries, linens for the bed. He figured you'd want to add your own touches, but at least you'd have somewhere safe to sleep tonight. Annika walked through the small space, Mason heavy in her arms. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and warm. And theirs. For the first time in months, she could picture a future that extended beyond just surviving to the next day. Sophia, she said quietly, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you really think I can do this job? Be honest. Sophia studied her for a moment. You know what I think? I think anyone who can keep a baby happy and healthy while homeless and jobless probably has the organizational skills and stress management abilities to handle anything this restaurant can throw at them. The rest, the technical stuff about food service and management, that's all teachable. Mason chose that moment to let out a contented sigh and snuggled closer to Annika's chest, finally ready for his nap. She looked down at his peaceful face and felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time, the possibility that they might actually be okay. When do I start? She asked. How about tomorrow morning? Come in at 8. We'll go over the opening procedures. By next week you'll be running this place like you've been here for years. That evening, after David had left and the restaurant had closed for the night, Annika sat in the rocking chair beside Mason's new crib, watching him sleep in a real bed for the first time in months. Through the window, she could see the lights of Lincoln Park, families walking home from dinner, couples browsing the bookstore windows. She thought about the laundromat where they'd spent the previous night, about all the doors that had been closed to them, all the people who'd looked at her and seen only problems and complications. Then she thought about David's story, about a stranger who'd helped him when he was lost and hungry, about the ripple effects of kindness that could span decades. Tomorrow, she will start learning how to be an assistant manager. She would make mistakes, ask too many questions, and probably feel overwhelmed more than once. But she would also be earning an honest wage, providing a stable home for Mason, and maybe, just maybe, proving to herself that she was capable of more than just surviving. As she finally climbed into her own bed, a real bed, with clean sheets and a warm comforter, she whispered a promise to the darkness. Someday, when she was in a position to help, she would pay this kindness forward. She would be the stranger who helped when someone else was lost and desperate, because maybe that's how the universe really worked. Not through grand gestures or perfect timing, but through ordinary people choosing to care for each other, one small act of kindness at a time. 6 months later, Annika stood behind the host station at the Blue Door, reviewing the evening's reservations while Mason played quietly in his portable playpen nearby. The October evening was crisp, and through the large windows she could see couples walking hand in hand past the glowing shop fronts of Lincoln Park. The familiar sounds of the dinner rush surrounded her, the gentle clatter of silverware, the soft murmur of conversation, the rhythmic chopping from the kitchen where Chef R was preparing his famous butternut squash soup. "Table 12 is ready for their dessert order," James called out as he passed by with a tray of entrees. "The anniversary couple. They're celebrating 40 years together." "I'll take it," Annika replied, smoothing down her navy blue door polo shirt. She'd learned to love these moments, connecting with customers who trusted them with their special occasions. In 6 months, she'd discovered she had a natural gift for reading people, for knowing exactly what would make their dining experience memorable. Sophia emerged from the kitchen, clipboard in hand, and flour somehow dusted across her cheek despite not having cooked anything herself. "Health inspector just left," she announced with a grin. "Perfect score, again." "That's because Chef R would rather die than serve subpar food," Annika laughed, reaching into Mason's playpen to hand him his favorite teething ring. At nearly a year old now, he'd become the unofficial restaurant mascot, charming customers and staff alike with his infectious giggles and chubby-cheeked smiles. "Speaking of Chef R," Sophia continued, "he wants to talk to you about the new seasonal menu. Apparently, your suggestion about the apple cider braised pork was genius," Annika felt, a familiar flutter of pride. In her previous jobs, her opinions had rarely been sought, let alone valued. Here she was encouraged to contribute ideas, to think creatively about everything, from menu development to staff scheduling to customer service improvements. The front door chimed, and Annika looked up to see a familiar figure entering. David. Jen stepped inside, shaking raindrops from his coat and scanning the dining room with the practiced eye of someone who noticed everything. He'd aged slightly in the past 6 months. There were a few more grey hairs at his temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but his smile when he spotted her was as warm as ever. "How's my favorite assistant manager?" he asked, approaching the host station. "Tired, stressed, and loving every minute of it," Annika replied honestly. "Mason, look who's here!" The baby's face lit up when he saw David, reaching up with both arms in the universal gesture for "pick me up." David obliged, lifting Mason out of the playpen and immediately launching into their usual routine of silly faces and made-up songs. "He's gotten so big," David observed, bouncing Mason gently. "What is he now, 20 pounds? 22, as of his doctor's appointment last week. Dr. Patterson says he's in the 95th percentile for height and weight." Annika's voice carried the unmistakable pride of a mother whose child was thriving. "He's also started pulling himself up to standing. I found him this morning trying to climb out of his crib. Time to lower the mattress," David advised with the confidence of someone who'd been through this before. His expression grew wistful for a moment, and Annika knew he was thinking about Marcus, about all the milestones he'd never get to see his own son reach. "Actually," she said gently, I was hoping to ask your advice about something. Mason's getting old enough that he needs more stimulation during the day, and I've been looking into daycare options. There's a great place called Little Sprouts about 6 blocks from here, but their waiting list is... Consider it handled, David interrupted. Little Sprouts happens to be owned by one of my business partners. I'll make a call. David, no, I can't keep accepting favors from you. I need to do this on my own. He studied her face carefully. Is that your pride talking or your practical sense? Both, maybe, Annika admitted. I don't want to be someone who only succeeds because she had help. I want to earn this. Annika, you've been earning this every single day for 6 months. You've increased our customer satisfaction scores by 15%. You've reduced staff turnover to almost 0. You've implemented 3 new systems that have improved our efficiency and profitability. David shifted Mason to his other arm, where the baby immediately began playing with his tie. Accepting help doesn't diminish your accomplishments. It's called building a network, and it's what successful people do. Before Annika could respond, a commotion at table 7 caught her attention. An elderly woman was standing beside her chair, gesturing frantically at something on the floor. "Excuse me," Annika said, immediately moving toward the table. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Chen?" Mrs. Chen, no relation to David despite the name, was a regular customer who came in every Tuesday evening for the early bird special. She was usually calm and soft-spoken, so her obvious distress was alarming. "My ring," Mrs. Chen said, her voice shaking. "My wedding ring. It slipped off my finger when I was reaching for my napkin. I can't find it anywhere." Annika immediately dropped to her hands and knees, searching under the table and chairs. The ring wasn't just jewelry. Mrs. Chen had told her once that her husband had saved for months to buy it before proposing 60 years ago. He'd passed away the previous spring, making the ring even more precious. "James, can you bring me a flashlight?" Annika called out. Within seconds, James appeared with his phone's flashlight, and together they methodically searched every inch around the table. "Here, let me help," David said, passing Mason to Sophia and joining the search. Soon, half the restaurant staff was involved, crawling around on the floor while other diners watched with interest rather than annoyance. "Found it!" Chef R's voice boomed from near the kitchen entrance. He held up a thin gold band that caught the light like a tiny star. "It rolled all the way over here." Mrs. Chen's relief was visible as she slipped the ring back onto her finger. "Thank you all so much. I don't know what I would have done if I'd lost it." "That's what family does," Annika said simply. "We take care of each other." As the restaurant returned to normal operations, David pulled Annika aside. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. "The way you immediately understood how important that ring was, the way you mobilized everyone to help, that's not something that can be taught. It's just basic human decency. No, it's leadership. It's the difference between managing a business and creating a community." David paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Which brings me to why I'm really here tonight." Annika felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. "Is something wrong? Did I do something?" "You did everything right. So right, in fact, that I have a proposition for you." He led her to a quiet corner table, away from the dinner rush. Sophia had taken Mason back to the office, where a basket of toys waited for exactly these situations. "I'm opening a new restaurant," David continued, "downtown near Navy Pier. It's going to be our flagship location, bigger than anything else in the company, with a more ambitious menu and a focus on special events and private dining." "That sounds amazing. I want you to be the general manager." The CEO words hit her like a physical blow. General manager, not assistant manager, not working toward a promotion, but the top position at what would be David's most important restaurant. "David, she started, then stopped, overwhelmed. "Before you say you're not ready, let me tell you what I see when I look at you. I see someone who increased profits here by 12% in 6 months, someone who created staff training, programs that other managers in my company are now copying, someone who turned customer complaints into customer loyalty through genuine care and creative problem solving. But I don't have formal management training or a business degree or... You have something better. You have instincts, integrity, and the respect of everyone who works with you. David leaned forward. Annika, I've been in this business for 20 years. I've hired MBAs from prestigious schools, experienced managers with impressive resumes, people who looked perfect on paper. Most of them lasted less than a year because they didn't understand what hospitality really means. What if I fail? Then you'll learn from it and do better next time. But you won't fail because I've watched you handle every challenge that's come your way with grace and intelligence. David's voice grew serious. I'm not offering you this position because I feel sorry for you or because I want to be charitable. I'm offering it because you're the best person for the job. Annika thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, desperate, homeless, convinced that she had nothing to offer the world. Then she thought about the woman she'd become, confident, capable, surrounded by people who valued her contributions. What about Mason? She asked. The hours would be longer, the responsibility greater. I can't compromise his well-being for career advancement. The new location will have an on-site childcare facility for employees' children, professional caregivers, educational activities, but close enough that you can check on him throughout the day. David smiled. Mason's needs aren't an obstacle to your success, Annika. They're part of what makes you the right person for this job. You understand what working parents need because you are one. Through the window, Annika could see the lights of the city, sparkling in the distance. Somewhere out there were other women like her, struggling, doubting themselves, convinced that their circumstances defined their limitations. Maybe, as general manager of David's flagship restaurant, she could help some of them the way he'd helped her. When would you need an answer? She asked. Take all the time you need. But Annika... David stood, preparing to leave. Don't let fear make this decision for you. You've already proven you can do extraordinary things. Now it's time to believe it yourself. As he walked away, Annika sat in the quiet corner, watching the familiar rhythm of the blue door around her. This place had given her more than just a job. It had given her back her sense of worth, her belief in her own capabilities. Now David was offering her the chance to take everything she'd learned and build something even bigger. For the first time in her life, the future felt limitless. 1 year later, Annika stood in the gleaming kitchen of Horizon, David's flagship restaurant, watching her team prepare for the evening's service. The space was a masterpiece of modern design, polished concrete floors, exposed steel beams, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Lake Michigan. At 34, she was the youngest general manager in Chen Industries' history, overseeing a staff of 60 and a restaurant that had been booked solid since opening night 3 months ago. Chef Williams, how are we looking at the lamb special? She called out to the head chef, a culinary school graduate who'd initially been skeptical about taking direction from someone without formal training. 20 portions ready, 10 more in. In prep, Chef Williams replied, no longer showing any trace of the condescension that had marked their first few weeks working together. Annika had won his respect the hard way, through consistent excellence, creative problem-solving, and an unshakable commitment to quality that matched his own. The private dining room was hosting a corporate event tonight. 60 executives from a Fortune 500 company celebrating a major merger. It was exactly the kind of high-stakes event that would have terrified her 18 months ago. Now, she moved through the preparations with calm efficiency, checking every detail twice and trusting her instincts when something felt off. Ms. Rodriguez. A young server named Elena approached hesitantly. She was new, Barely 21, with the same nervous energy Annika remembered from her own early days in food service. The client wants to add 10 more guests to tonight's event. Is that possible? Annika quickly ran the numbers in her head: seating capacity, kitchen prep time, server to guest ratios. Yes, but we'll need to adjust the room setup and coordinate with Chef Williams on portions. Can you handle calling the client back while I reorganize the floor plan? Absolutely. Thank you for trusting me with it. As Elena hurried away, Annika smiled. She'd learned that empowering her staff to handle challenges was far more effective than micromanaging every decision. It was a lesson she'd picked up from watching David, though she'd adapted it to her own leadership style. Mason, no, the familiar voice of Carmen, the head of their on-site childcare facility, echoed from the hallway. Annika looked up to see her 15-month-old son toddling determinedly toward the kitchen, having apparently escaped from the childcare room during their afternoon playtime. "There's my little escape artist," Annika laughed, scooping Mason into her arms. He immediately began babbling excitedly, pointing at the busy kitchen and clearly wanting to be part of the action. "Sorry, Annika," Carmen said, slightly out of breath. "He's getting too fast for us. The moment I turned to help another child, he was out the door." "It's fine. He knows this is where Mama works." Annika bounced Mason gently, enjoying his delighted giggles. "Someone wants to help with dinner service, don't you, buddy?" Mason's response was to reach for her chef's coat, trying to pull it toward his mouth. At 15 months, he was walking confidently, saying a handful of words, and displaying the same determination that had carried his mother through her darkest days. "Ms. Rodriguez?" Another staff member approached, this time Miguel, the assistant manager she'd hired and trained herself. "David Chen is here. He's asking to speak with you when you have a moment." Annika felt the familiar flutter of nervousness that still accompanied David's visits, though it was different now. No longer the anxiety of someone afraid of losing everything, but the anticipation of someone who genuinely valued his opinion and guidance. She found David in the main dining room, standing by the windows and looking out at the lake. The late afternoon sun painted the water gold, and sailboats dotted the horizon like white butterflies. He turned when he heard her approach, his face lighting up when he saw Mason in her arms. "There's my favorite restaurant owner in training," David said, holding out his hands to Mason, who immediately leaned toward him. "He's not quite ready to manage his own restaurant," Annika laughed, transferring Mason to David's arms, "though he does have strong opinions about the music we play during lunch service." "Smart kid. Ambiance matters." David settled Mason more comfortably, automatically starting the gentle bouncing motion that kept toddlers happy. "How are you feeling about tonight?" "Confidence. My team knows what they're doing. The food is exceptional, and we're prepared for any complications." Annika paused. "Why? Should I be worried about something?" "Not worried, excited." David's smile grew mysterious. "I have some news to share with you after service tonight. Good news." Before Annika could press for details, Elena reappeared with an update on the expanded guest list, and David gracefully excused himself, promising to return later in the evening. The dinner service went flawlessly. The corporate executives were delighted with both the food and the service. The private dining room hummed with satisfied conversation, and the regular dinner crowd in the main restaurant seemed equally pleased with their meals. Annika moved through the evening like a conductor leading an orchestra, coordinating between kitchen and floor staff, checking on VIP tables, and solving small problems before they became large ones. At 9:30, as the last of the corporate guests were leaving, and the dinner crowd was winding down, David returned. This time he wasn't alone. A woman in her 50s accompanied him, elegant, professionally dressed, with the kind of confident bearing that suggested she was used to being the most important person in any room. "Annika, I'd like you to meet Margaret Sterling." David said. "Margaret, this is Annika Rodriguez, the general manager I've been telling you about." Margaret extended her hand with a warm smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Annika. David has spoken very highly of your work here." "Thank you," Annika replied, wondering who this woman was and why David had brought her here tonight. "Margaret is the regional director for the James Beard Foundation," David explained, and Annika felt her heart skip a beat. The James Beard Foundation was the most prestigious organization in American cuisine, known for recognizing excellence in food service, culinary arts, and hospitality. "We're launching a new initiative," Margaret continued, "a mentorship and recognition program for outstanding restaurant managers who demonstrate exceptional leadership, innovation, and commitment to hospitality excellence. David nominated you as our pilot candidate." Annika stared at them both, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "You've been selected as the first recipient of the James Beard Foundation's Excellence in Hospitality Leadership Award," Margaret said. "The recognition comes with a cash prize, a feature in our national publication, and most importantly, the opportunity to mentor other up-and-coming managers across the country." The words seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet restaurant. Annika looked around at her staff, who had clearly overheard the conversation and were beaming with pride. Chef Williams actually applauded, followed by Elena, Miguel, and soon the entire team. "I don't understand," Annika said, overwhelmed. "There are managers with decades of experience, formal education, prestigious backgrounds, none of whom have accomplished what you've accomplished," Margaret interrupted gently. "In 18 months, you've gone from unemployed single mother to running one of Chicago's most successful restaurants. You've innovated new staff training programs, increased customer satisfaction scores, and created a workplace culture that other establishments are trying to emulate. More importantly, you've done it all while maintaining the values that make hospitality meaningful: compassion, integrity, and genuine care for both your staff and your customers." David stepped forward, his eyes bright with something that looked like paternal pride. "Do you remember what I told you that first night? That sometimes helping someone isn't about them paying you back, but about paying forward the kindness someone else showed you?" Annika nodded, thinking of the Greek diner owner who'd helped a young David when he was lost and desperate. "This award isn't just recognition of what you've achieved," David continued. "It's an opportunity to be that helping hand for other people who are where you used to be, to show them that circumstances don't define possibilities." Margaret handed Annika an elegant folder containing the award details. "We'd like you to develop a training program for managers from underserved communities, people who have the instincts and dedication but lack the traditional credentials. You'd help them discover what you've discovered, that real hospitality comes from the heart, not from a textbook." As Annika opened the folder, Mason, who had been contently playing with David's tie throughout the conversation, suddenly looked up at his mother and said, clear as day, "Mama, proud." The room erupted in laughter and applause. It was only Mason's fourth recognizable word, but he'd chosen the perfect moment to use it. "Yes, baby," Annika whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Mama is proud, and I'm grateful, and ready to help other mamas just like us." 6 months later, Annika stood in a conference room at the James Beard Foundation headquarters in New York, facing 20 aspiring restaurant managers from cities across the country. Some were single parents like she'd been, others were immigrants, starting over in a new country, former foster children aging out of the system, or people rebuilding their lives after addiction or incarceration. "Hospitality," she began, looking at each of their faces, "isn't about perfection. It's about connection. It's about seeing people, really seeing them, and making them feel valued and cared for. Some of you will make mistakes. You'll have bad days, difficult customers, moments when you doubt yourself. But if you remember that every person who walks through your door is someone's mother, father, son, or daughter, you'll never go wrong. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Ms. Rodriguez, how do you balance being a single mother with such a demanding career? Annika thought of Mason, now walking confidently and speaking in short sentences, who had spent the morning exploring Central Park with David while she prepared for this presentation. You don't balance it, she said honestly. You integrate it. Your children, your family, your personal challenges, they're not obstacles to overcome. They're part of what makes you who you are, and who you are is exactly who the hospitality industry needs. After the session, as the participants mingled and exchanged contact information, David approached with Mason in tow. Her son had chocolate on his face and was clutching a small toy airplane David had clearly bought him at the airport gift shop. How did it go? David asked. Like coming full circle, Annika replied, watching as several of the participants gathered around Elena, now a manager herself at one of the smaller Chen Industries locations, to ask questions about staff scheduling and inventory management. Speaking of coming full circle, David said, I have one more surprise for you. He handed her a business card, simple, elegant, with her name embossed in gold lettering. Annika Rodriguez, Director of Hospitality Excellence, Chen Industries. What's this? Your new position, if you want it. You'd oversee management development across all our locations, implement the training programs you've created, and work directly with the James Beard Foundation to expand their mentorship initiative nationally. Annika stared at the card, thinking of the crumpled newspaper clipping she'd carried into Magnolia's that night so long ago, when 47 cents and desperation had been all she had to her name. I want it, she said without hesitation. But only if Mason can still come to work with me sometimes. I wouldn't have it any other way, David laughed. After all, he's been part of this journey from the beginning. As they walked through the busy streets of Manhattan, Mason pointing excitedly at the towering buildings and yellow taxis, Annika thought about all the doors that had seemed closed to her 2 years ago. She thought about the hostess at Magnolia's, who tried to turn her away, the shelter that had been full the night she'd spent on the subway platform, all the job applications that had gone unanswered. But mostly, she thought about the power of one person's choice to see potential instead of problems, to offer hope instead of judgment. David's kindness had changed her life, but she understood now that it had changed his too. In helping her, he'd found a way to honor his family's memory and rediscover his own sense of purpose. Mama, Mason said suddenly, tugging on her coat. Home, yes, baby, she replied, looking around at the city full of possibilities, the future full of people she could help, the life she'd built through determination and the grace of unexpected kindness. We're going home. And for the first time in her life, she knew exactly where home was, not a place, but a feeling. The feeling of belonging, of being valued, of knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had the strength to face them and the wisdom to extend the same compassion to others that had once been extended to her. The circle was complete, but the story was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.